Throughout history, certain objects have disappeared not by accident, but by design. Hidden in vaults, burned from records, or sealed beneath stone. These artifacts weren't simply forgotten. They were erased. Among the most feared of these were amulets, ancient talismans believed to carry a force the Church would never dare to name publicly. These were not decorative charms or symbols of faith. They were remnants of an older world, one that existed before organized religion drew the line between divine and dangerous. Each of the 5 amulets that surfaced over the centuries carried with it a trail of consequences. Unexplained events, psychological disturbances, and documented attempts by church authorities to confiscate or destroy them. But time, as always, uncovered what secrecy tried to bury. And what was revealed told a story not of superstition, but of a forbidden technology far more powerful than anyone expected. The first amulet was discovered in the 19th century, during routine farming work in central France. What appeared at first to be a simple medallion was later confirmed to contain inscriptions in ancient Aramaic, etched into weathered bronze. The design on its reverse side depicted a disfigured tongue surrounded by radiating lines, carved with crude precision. Days after its discovery, the farmer who found it permanently lost his ability to speak, despite showing no physical signs of injury. Local doctors were unable to explain the cause. Later, scholars identified the artifact as matching a description in a suppressed 12th century manuscript stored briefly in the Vatican Library. That document referenced a forbidden object used during early exorcism rituals, intended not to cast spirits out, but to sever their influence by forcefully silencing the possessed. The Church considered the item dangerous, not only for its supposed effects, but because of the heretical belief it represented, that spiritual forces could be neutralized without divine intervention. After resurfacing, the amulet was briefly studied before disappearing from record once more. The second amulet emerged from a sealed tomb complex in the Syrian desert. Recovered by a team of archaeologists, it was encased in layers of melted lead, surrounded by fragments of broken tablets and ceremonial ashes. The object itself was carved from volcanic glass and ringed with a thread of gold embedded around its edge. Its surface showed an eye-like pattern, subtly asymmetrical, which seemed to shimmer under direct light. Soon after its removal from the tomb, members of the excavation team began reporting the same recurring nightmare: a collapsing stone temple, blinding flashes of light, and the sensation of being watched. Over time, connections were made between this artifact and references to a cursed object once associated with the worship of Baal, a pre-Christian deity long condemned by the Church. Historical records show multiple attempts to eliminate any trace of Baal-related symbols, with some accounts describing unexplained fires breaking out in chapels after such items were brought inside. One event, recorded in the 16th century, involved the collapse of an entire bell tower after a ceremonial relic bearing the eye was locked within its walls. No storm or earthquake had been reported in the region at the time. The Church had long considered artifacts linked to pre-Christian deities as spiritually volatile. In the case of the eye, the reaction was immediate and absolute. It was sealed, catalogued under false nomenclature, and hidden beneath ecclesiastical ruins. Yet copies of its symbol began to appear in private collections, sketchbooks, and letters, always incomplete, always followed by claims of illness, madness, or disappearance. The third amulet was taken by force during the Spanish conquest of the Americas. A group of soldiers confiscated it from a highland shaman in what is now southern Peru. Unlike the others, this amulet resembled a small heart, carved from polished green stone and veined with threads of silver. Soldiers who carried the object reported persistent nausea, sleep disturbances, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Within a week, one officer collapsed during morning prayer, his chest seizing violently before he lost consciousness. A missionary recorded the event in detail, noting that the object remained unnaturally warm even in the cold mountain air. The amulet was returned to the clergy and placed inside a sealed lead container, then buried beneath the floor of a colonial-era cathedral. Over 400 years later, during structural renovations, the box was rediscovered and opened. 2 workers suffered cardiac episodes within hours. A third vanished without trace. No official link was made, but the box was resealed and removed under military escort. Its current whereabouts remain unknown, though unconfirmed photographs continue to circulate in academic circles. Researchers who study the images claim the shape of the veins on the object shift subtly between versions. None of these artifacts were designed to comfort, to heal, or to inspire devotion. They served a different purpose, one that blurred the line between tool and curse, protection and punishment. And while official doctrine refused to acknowledge them, the pattern remained consistent. Whenever the Church encountered an amulet too persistent to ignore, it was hidden, never destroyed. As if those responsible feared that destruction itself might trigger something far worse. What united these first 3 amulets wasn't their origin or material, but the way they resisted erasure. Every attempt to bury them, to remove them from collective memory, failed. They returned in new places, new hands, and new consequences. Not because they were lost, but because they were found again, by those who did not yet know the cost. The 4th amulet was uncovered not by explorers or archaeologists, but by accident, discovered in the rubble of a crumbling monastery outside Verona, Italy. After World War II, a group of boys exploring the ruins stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath what remained of the altar. Inside was a stone container wrapped in rusted rosary chains and sealed with a hardened wax bearing the insignia of a long-dissolved religious order. What it contained was unlike anything catalogued in official church records. The object was a crescent-shaped talisman carved from deep black obsidian. It had no inscriptions, no visible ornamentation, but the material itself absorbed light unnaturally. Alongside it, fragments of parchment were found, partially preserved, describing a series of events within the monastery centuries earlier. Instances of hallucinations, unexplained disappearances, and intense episodes of confession followed by immediate self-imprisonment by clergy members. The texts referred repeatedly to visions seen only during specific hours of the night, and to a phenomenon where human faces were perceived as masks hiding something underneath. Though the Church made no public statement regarding the object, internal records later revealed that similar crescent-shaped relics had been linked to episodes of mass delusion and spiritual paralysis among isolated congregations during the 17th century. In one instance, a monastic chapel was sealed and abandoned after its inhabitants reported weeks of sustained insomnia, claiming they could see their own deaths reflected in mirrors. In each case, investigators ordered the amulet to be buried and sealed under sacred ground. The resurfacing of the Verona talisman sparked a renewed wave of interest among independent researchers. Though it was eventually confiscated by Vatican emissaries, unverified photos and eyewitness accounts suggest the object may have changed hands more than once before being locked away again. What remains consistent in every account is the sensation reported by those who handled it. An overwhelming urge to look away, followed by a persistent feeling of being watched, even while alone. The 5th and most elusive of the amulets is also the most disputed. Known only through fragmented references in suppressed documents and private correspondence, it is often referred to by a single name, the Bone Cross. Unlike the others, it is believed to have been crafted not from stone or metal, but from human remains. Descriptions vary, but most agree it is no larger than a thumb and carved into a simple cruciform shape. What makes it distinct is not the material or the design, but the effects attributed to it. Effects which defy all known theological categories. According to scattered records, the bone cross was created by a former monk accused of heresy and witchcraft during the early 13th century. Rather than face execution, he fled into hiding, taking with him knowledge forbidden even to inquisitors. The object he left behind was said to temporarily reanimate the dead, not in full consciousness, but in a state of violent awakening. Witnesses described unnatural sounds and rapid bodily decay, with revived individuals reduced to ash within minutes. The Church's reaction was immediate and absolute: excommunication for anyone who even attempted to replicate the ritual. Despite centuries of suppression, occasional reports continued to emerge. A 17th-century letter written by a Jesuit scholar referenced an unnamed relic believed to have caused the disappearance of an entire convent in northern Italy. A later account from the early 1900s described a bishop in rural Spain who vanished shortly after acquiring what he believed to be a fragment of the original amulet. In each case, any surviving documentation was either destroyed or buried under layers of ecclesiastical censorship. Unlike the other four, the bone cross was never officially confirmed to exist. No photographs, no physical samples, no verified sightings. Yet within Vatican archives, references to it are found hidden in marginal notes, redacted inventories, and unexplained gaps in catalogued relics. For some researchers, its very absence is the strongest proof of its reality, because only something truly dangerous would require such complete removal from history. Together, these 5 amulets form a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Their stories span continents and centuries. They appear in different forms, yet always bring the same consequences: secrecy, suppression, and unexplained suffering. In each case, institutions of faith moved not to reveal or understand, but to contain, not because they knew what these amulets were, but because they feared what they could become if left unchecked. These were not objects created to inspire worship or devotion. They were forged for control, and in every generation, someone has tried to control them again. The stories surrounding these amulets were never part of mainstream religious teaching, and for good reason. Their existence contradicted the neat boundaries between sacred relics and condemned sorcery. Each item defied categorization: neither holy nor fully profane, neither relic nor weapon. The Church, which had spent centuries defining spiritual authority, had no place for objects that seemed to operate outside its doctrine, yet produced results too precise to dismiss as myth. Over time, a silent consensus was formed within the highest levels of ecclesiastical power. These artifacts would not be studied, debated, or displayed. They would be buried, sealed, or placed in deep storage under false names. Private archivists working for the Church developed new classification codes to mask references to them. Curators in the Vatican secret archives began assigning blank catalog numbers to certain entries. Some pages were left entirely unmarked, others written in dead dialects, designed to be overlooked by anyone without specific training. And yet, despite these measures, the amulets never fully disappeared. Their symbols began appearing in scattered places, engraved on the margins of forgotten manuscripts, embedded into stonework inside abandoned churches, scrawled into prison walls by inmates with no prior exposure to their history. A recurring pattern began to emerge. Individuals who encountered these signs reported similar experiences: persistent dreams, sudden illnesses, altered perception of time, or a disconnection from familiar emotions like fear or grief. Modern researchers who investigated these cases often found dead ends, records missing, locations inaccessible, key witnesses untraceable. What few findings made it into academic circles were quietly dismissed or mislabeled as apocryphal. But beneath the surface, a loose network of independent historians, occult archivists, and former theologians continued to share information privately. Many of them had never met in person. Some disappeared after publishing small pieces of what they had discovered. One such pattern involved geographical alignments. When plotted on a global map, The last known appearances of the 5 amulets formed a specific configuration. 5 points that mirrored ancient celestial diagrams used in pre-Christian rituals. This suggested that their placement was not random, that even in secrecy someone, or something, was maintaining a pattern that spanned continents and centuries. The implications were clear to those who studied it closely. These were not lost objects. They were being preserved, perhaps even positioned. What troubled the researchers most wasn't the supernatural claims surrounding the amulets. It was the consistency. Across dozens of independent accounts, certain phrases, symptoms, and outcomes repeated with unnerving precision. People who had never spoken, never read the same books, and lived in completely different cultures described the same sensations upon contact. Heaviness in the chest, a metallic taste in the mouth, distorted perception of light, and time lapses measured in hours. These effects never lasted, but they left marks, some physical, others impossible to quantify. And then there were the disappearances. Individuals who handled or investigated the artifacts too deeply would simply vanish. No trace, no explanation. In some cases, their last known communications referenced feelings of being followed, or a sense of watching eyes that grew stronger each day. Not everyone believed these accounts. Some considered them exaggerations. But the growing number of consistent vanishings, especially among trained professionals, was difficult to ignore. What began as a handful of isolated events had become a larger, coordinated silence. Not just from the church, but from those with access to institutional memory. Museum departments closing exhibitions without notice. Clergy refusing to speak about local legends. Archives being reordered under new names. It was no longer just about hiding the amulets. It was about erasing the trail entirely. Still, a few voices remained. Those who believed that these objects represented not danger, but warning. That they were not meant to be used, but to be remembered. Not as tools of power, but as evidence of a truth that religious institutions, political structures, and academic gatekeepers could never fully admit. Because if these artifacts were real, and all signs suggest they were, then the greatest secret isn't what they could do. It's who wanted them hidden. And why. Centuries have passed, but the presence of these forbidden amulets still lingers, trapped in rumors, hidden in sealed archives, and whispered through generations. The church never needed to issue formal denials. Silence proved more effective. These artifacts were not discredited. They were erased, not because they threatened doctrine, but because they revealed something even more dangerous: the limits of control. Each time one of them resurfaced, the same signs followed. Disturbances, disappearances, patterns too consistent to ignore. The artifacts never stayed buried for long. They moved silently, changing hands, reappearing in moments of chaos or transition. And while the modern world may dismiss them as myth, the symbols return, the shadows repeat, and history begins to echo. What makes them so unsettling is not just their power, but their persistence. They were never just objects. They were reminders that some truths cannot be destroyed, only delayed. Some knowledge cannot be forgotten, only hidden. And now, as more people look deeper into what was once forbidden, these stories rise again. The question is no longer whether the amulets existed. It's whether they were warnings, and whether we've already missed what they tried to tell us. If you're drawn to what others tried to bury, and you're ready to keep uncovering what was never meant to be found, subscribe to the channel. The real history has just begun.